welcome to our annual review. Sorry about the short delay. You may be able to hear me, you may be wishing like weren't working. But anyway, they are working, so you're going to have to listen to me. I'm Alec Linkson, I'm Chairman of the Board. It's a great pleasure to have that position, and I'm delighted to be here today to talk about NHS Forth Valley. Okay, right, today's agenda, 3 broad headings. First of all, talk to me a bit about our achievements and areas for action. The government's triple aim, better care, better value, better health, what that means, what we are doing about it in Forth Valley, and then a question and answer session. So any questions, there'll be plenty of opportunity to ask them. Just start off with this slide, just to remind us why we're here, and that's to cater for the health needs of the population of Forth Valley, irrespective of their age or medical conditions. We start each board meeting with a patient story, just to remind us why we are here. So all our actions are focused on making the experience of patients as good as we can make it. Some numbers, we have 6,148 staff, quite a precise figure that. Server population just over 300,000 from Bowness to Tildrum, so it's quite a big geographic area. We have a budget of £550 million, a lot of money, but it's never enough. In terms of activities, we delivered over 3,100 babies last year. On the next slide, there was 80,000 emergency attendances, 217,000 outpatient attendances, 50,000 hospital admissions, 5 million tests carried out to find out what was wrong with people, 750,000 contacts with our community nurses and allied health professionals, and our care and staff produce 3,500 meals every day. So we are quite a big organisation. In terms of our values, the values drive how we go about our business, and these are values that we developed in conjunction with our staff. And just before lunchtime, we had our annual staff awards in this actual room, and they were themed round about the actual values. We had 444 entries. That's 444 entries. I exaggerate a wee bit. 440, just checking that you are still awake. 444 entries over these different 6 values. That's 444 initiatives that were being carried out. And it was really heart-lifting to see the way the staff are taking the values actually forward to improve patient care. It's really, really powerful examples of what we're doing as a health board. We published our healthcare strategy last year, and that's going to drive what we do over the next 5 years. That was written after a lot of consultation, both within the hospital and with their partners and with the actual public, with a lot of good ideas, and where it's practical, we are taking them forward in our healthcare strategy. It's very much focused on prevention, person-centred, reducing inequalities, care closer at home, plan ahead in partnership, minimising delays and variations, and supporting our workforce. So that's what we're going to drive forward, and over the next 5 years we'll give you an update on how we're doing against the actual strategy. The government equally have a national strategy, and it very much complements Shaping Our Future, except in our version we're saying how we're going to take forward the national strategy and meet the local needs of our residents. And incorporates the triple aim, better care, better value, better health, the integration of health and social care partnership, delivery and delivery plans. In terms of some of our achievements, great to have the opening of the Maggie's Centre this year. I think that's a very welcome addition to our cancer services, the health service. While Maggie's is a separate organisation, we work very closely with them to maximise the benefit of people who and their families who suffer from cancer. So we're delighted to have that. Equally, we've started work in the new Stirling Care Village. It's a partnership between the Health Board and Stirling Council. And again, that will bring a lot of services together under one roof. I think it's really innovative and creative partnership. I'm delighted to say it's on track, on budget, and it will be completed next year. In terms of achievements and national awards, that's always a good litmus test on how good you're comparing against other health boards, other organisations. We're just showing 2 awards. We've won quite a lot of awards in the last 12 months. But the top one, the Scottish Health Awards, that's probably the premier health awards in Scotland. All the great and the good go to that. There's 16 categories, and we won 4 of the 16. So 25% of the categories we win. That's a tremendous achievement for a board of this actual size. I happen to be one of the judges. I've got to say it didn't affect the scoring. There was about 20 judges. So what I thought was diluted. But one of the things that greatly impressed me as I was wading through these hundreds of applications and trying to sort them out into the first, second and third was the number of applications from Forth Valley. We won 4 categories, but we had a lot more. And these ones that didn't actually win, they were equally very, very good. And I'm delighted to say, and you're going to hear about more of this later on, just last night we won another award, the Scotland Dementia Awards, the Best Acute Care Initiative. So that's hot off the press. We had a presentation of the work we were doing at our last board meeting. It was very, very impressive. So I can fully understand why they won last night. But again, it just shows that we are at the forefront of innovation. We've got a great team of staff that's driving forward healthcare in our area. So to the staff, and I've said this morning, I'll say it again, thanks very much for you doing a tremendous job for us. Certainly makes my job as chairman very, very easy. So some of our other achievements, we achieved financial targets. You might say, well, we should do that anyway, but given rising demand and finances don't necessarily came up with it, although health finance is prioritised by the government, there's just not enough money to keep pace with. So achieving financial balance is quite an achievement. We're investing heavily in e-health, and I had a meeting with staff today, and they were giving me examples how the investment in e-health is helping them do their job in terms of patient care. Rather than having patient records manual that's about that size, they can see all the appropriate information on a screen. Very much working with our GP partners to actually help sustain the GP service, given the national shortage, and things like transforming the GP out of hours, the primary care, the services there, and having mental health services in primary care. So hopefully that will all help sustain our community services. It'd be nice to stand here and say everything's actually perfect, and I've certainly given you a good build-up on that. But yeah, we have our challenges. You'll hear more about that later on. Before our waits, the government require us to treat everybody, either admit them to hospital or discharge them within 4 hours. Sometimes we achieve it, sometimes we don't. Our performance is inconsistent, is getting a lot of attention to improve it. Sometimes it's because there's just a big spike in number of people who turn up in accident emergency overwhelm us. Other times the hospital's full and it's difficult to fit people into bed who need a bed. But we're doing a lot of work with the new health and social care partnerships and looking at alternatives to hospital admission to try and help us manage that. Because as the population ages, and that problem is going to increase. And delayed discharges, that's where somebody's clinical needs have been dealt with, but before they can move on, they need either a residential home or a specialist care or specialist support at actual home. And there's delay in doing that, and that could start to clog up the hospital as well, and it starts to interfere with the normal flow of patients. So that's a major challenge. And waiting times generally is a challenge for us. You have staff shortages. Most of our recruitment is actually done once a year when students come out of medical college. So if we have a vacancy, say in February, there's just no people in the market that you can go out and recruit for a lot of normal jobs. We're recruiting from medical school, and it's next autumn before the actual start. And that gives us actual problems. Now you can go and hire locums and that's very expensive. And you've got to balance that against keeping within your actual budget. So it's very much a balancing act. So if you go through a period of losing staff, then your performance can plummet very, very quickly. So that's always going to be a continual problem. It's something, as a board, we get regular updates. We are well clued into the challenge, aren't we, David? And so it's something we strive for perfection, but it is a major challenge. Now, my final slide is looking ahead. Obviously, shaping the future of our healthcare strategy is going to drive a lot of what we do over the next 5 years. Working in partnership will be at the core of everything we do, working with our community planning partners, working with health and social care, joint boards. And now regional government or regional planning has now come on the agenda. The government's carved Scotland into 3, east, west and north. Quite simple, easy to remember. And they're requiring these regions to plan hospital services on a regional-wide basis to make sure we maximise use of buildings and scarce clinical actual resources. So we're all busy preparing regional plans, and these will go into government next actual March, and they're going to more and more drive the investment that goes into the actual health services. We have the challenges, ageing population. I'm afraid age doesn't come in its own. For a lot of us, I feel myself in that category a lot. For a lot of us, it brings its own sort of health problems, which puts huge demand on ourselves. So that's always going to be a problem for us, getting the resource, both people resource and money resource, to deal with an ever-increasing demand on our services. The financial environment is going to be with us for a long time, and we need to learn to live with that and maximise the resources we've got. And our workforce, while they're a tremendous asset, they're also getting older as well. A high proportion of people are over 50, and we've got to make sure there is succession planning in place, and also develop the skills of our workforce to meet the changing healthcare needs of our population. So that's all I want to say in terms of setting the scene. I'm delighted now to pass over to our Director of Nursing Services, Professor Angela Wallace.
Good afternoon, everyone. As Chairman says, my name is Angela Wallace, and I've got the privilege to speak to you just for a few moments around our better approach to care, and particularly focusing in on patient safety and patient experience. I think I would start by saying that I've managed to speak to the annual reviews for a number of years now, and spent some time with you describing the work that we are doing to improve patient care and experience, particularly by listening to what matters to patients and the public and to our staff, and taking improvement actions around that. But as Chairman has finished with his slide on challenges, I will share some things that we're working really hard on and we're doing well on. But all of you in the room today will know that we don't always get everything right. And some of the things I will describe to you is the actions that we are taking when we can do better, when we're not getting things right, and if we have to listen really carefully to perhaps develop different services or ways of doing things. So lots to celebrate, but lots as well that it's really important to focus on. So hopefully it'll be a balanced message, some to give you comfort and hopefully some to give you reassurance and assurance that we're taking action. I think I've described the approach in Forth Valley and how the board approaches care for people, and that we believe our health services are safe and person-centred, but we absolutely believe that we can make care safer still, and we can improve how we care and listen and support our patients. So I'm going to just in a few moments just take you through a couple of areas, and I'm going to touch on quality improvement, I'm going to touch on patient safety and infection control. I'm going to talk a wee bit about the care we've been doing to improve care for older people in hospitals and care for older people in general, including patients with a cognitive impairment or dementia, and a wee bit about our person-centred work and how we can continually make sure that the board is listening and taking action, and the tone and the passion and the care of which we deliver care is appropriate for individuals. In terms of our achievements, this slide really indicates, I hope to you, that this board has care, improving care and patient experience at the heart of what it does. And you might say, well, you should have that, and that should be the case. And we're really lucky enough to have a board that absolutely signals that, not just in action, but in terms of the top of the board's agenda. So Chairman's already mentioned, but if you were at our board meeting, we do start every board meeting with a patient story. They're really powerful. They do remind us, as Chairman says, why we're all here, but they also remind us of the experiences, good and bad, that people have, and the board encourage and support and take action to support the staff to make things even better. And if you look at our board agenda, the vast majority of it, clearly we've got to make sure we hit our financial targets. That's right, Chairman's described that, and other targets that we have, and we take them really seriously. But caring for our staff, as well as caring for patients and the public that we serve, has an equal weight on the board meeting, and you would think, well, that should be, but I don't think that's the case everywhere, and that's something that we take really seriously. And if you look down the rest of the organisation, the quality improvement, the strategic approach to quality improvement is embedded in everything we do, from our senior management team into our directorate teams into our local team plans. And we've heard so much today, our awards, of some of the things that the staff that are doing. They're making an incredible contribution. And alongside that, Forth Valley has systematically and been determined to make sure that patient and public engagement and listening to those who are using our services and our partner organisations are heard, and we can draw that in so that's a very complete picture around our priorities. And in the organisation, we have a strategic quality improvement programme, we have a strategy, and we have brought together all the various works. It's a very busy landscape in quality improvement and safety. The government are asking us to do lots of things. We are really ambitious, and there's lots of things we want to do to get better for patients. The landscape can be very busy, but what we have done is bring things together as coherently as we can so that our staff have got the best chance of knowing what matters, what's their priorities, and then how the organisation can just support them to deliver. So the board take this really seriously, and we're delighted to say that that will continue regardless of how tricky the financial or other environments are. In terms of patient safety, again, I've managed to speak to you for a few years to say that we believe that our care for patients is safe. But in Scotland and in this board, we believe that we can make care safer still, and we'll continue to do that. And you'll know that Scotland was the very first country, I think it might still be one of the only countries, but my colleagues from the government and others may know better, but Scotland was the first country to say, together as a country, we are going to make care in hospitals initially, and then across services, safer as a whole country. And we're the first people to do that. And we have, luckily enough, been in at the very beginning of that programme, and this organisation has embraced that. And today I want to say that the Scottish Patient Safety Programme and all the work that it brings and the things that it can do for patients is alive and well in the organisation. And often colleagues in the government will say, if we stop that programme tomorrow, Forth Valley would certainly still keep that going. I used to tell you about how many staff were washing their hands and how hard we were working to make sure that people were washing their hands, and you would say, how can that possibly be the case? What I can say, and I said last year and the year before, is things like hand washing, taking time every day to check out what things we need to do to keep patients safe, regardless of the environment, just happens as normal now. And they were things that actually took us 4, 5, maybe 5 or 6 years, Monica, to really get that embedded. And now we can see all staff doing these things, just what's to be expected. And that might seem quite incredible, but as a country, we were the first people to do that, and as a board, we've been incredibly successful. The Scottish Patient Safety Programme runs across adult and acute inpatients. That includes our community hospitals, to mental health, to children and neonatal and maternity services, and into primary care, and we support that systematically. There is a really tough government target, and it's in that middle point, and it says HSMR. And what that means is that we believe that through doing a range of work, including some of the infrastructure things that I've talked to you about making sure the board never loses it, is a priority, that we can avoid unnecessary deaths or avoidable deaths across the organisation. And it's called the Hospital Standardised Mortality Ratio. What I can see is that we have been very, very successful around that, and even recently the government trickily changed the targets and made them even more difficult. And I'm pleased to say, and the board spent a lot of time on this, is that we are continue to reduce this and have a fantastic performance around that, although there is more to go. The bottom slide talks about sustained reduction in cardiac arrest, and again I have spoken to you before around this. What this simply means that we are picking up our patients who in our acute wards in particular are showing signs of deterioration, who they're becoming increasingly unwell where we may not have expected them to do so. The cardiac arrest rate, of which we have been extremely successful around, is showing that all of our staff working together, medical staff, nursing staff, our managerial colleagues and everyone is working together to make sure that we can pick up patients before they become unwell and thus preventing cardiac arrests. And it's a very, very difficult subject, of course, but hopefully some reassurance that these really important things that you would just expect us to get right, we are focused on them and we're making improvements, although we've still much to go. My presentation is in two halves, you'll be glad to know, and I'm about to hand over to a colleague. I'm just giving you a 1 minute warning, Nicola, you award winner, you. But what we have been focusing continually on is our care of older people, particularly with dementia, but across all of our areas who need to require hospital treatment. We have been focused on preventing harm to this group, and also particularly, and most of you will know someone who has dementia or cognitive impairment coming into hospital or any healthcare setting is a really frightening experience, and we know by doing some things very differently that we can make sure that we do not add harm or emotional burden and distress to patients during that time. So it gives me great pleasure to show one of these improvement pieces of work in action and to hand over to Nicola Wood. Nicola is a brand newly appointed Alzheimer nurse consultant for NHS Forth Valley, and as Chairman has trailed with you, she has, with the team, and this has been a wide team, and she will tell you that, a wide team effort, but they have won multiple awards for this piece of work, which is just astounding. And last night, or yesterday afternoon, it won the Scotland's Dementia Award for the best acute care innovation in Scotland. So I'm going to hand over to Nicola.
Thank you. Some introduction. So my role is to focus on the care and experiences that people with dementia have when they come into the hospital setting. And this project focuses on the journey that people with dementia have, particularly in the acute hospital setting. So the reason for the project is we know that if someone with dementia experiences a transfer either late at night or they experience multiple transfers within a short space of time, it can increase the risk of developing something called delirium. So delirium can make a person become more confused than what they would normally be. It can make their length of stay in hospital longer, and it can put somebody more at risk of developing some serious conditions, serious consequences that can actually have a negative impact on their overall well-being. So prior to doing this project, we had evidence that a significant number of people with dementia were unfortunately experiencing transfers late at night or multiple transfers. And we knew to do something about this, it would really take a whole systems approach. We would need to get lots of different teams working together. Now this is teams from different backgrounds, different specialities, teams that actually had never worked together before, or some people hadn't even met each other before, but we knew we would all have to come together to work towards a shared goal with the patient with dementia at the heart of it. And as has been alluded to, we have been recognised at various different national events, which we're very proud of. The project has been quite successful, and just to let you understand some of the successes, this first chart here shows you the percentage of people with dementia who were being transferred prior to 8 o'clock at night. So you can see when we first started, really we were getting it right for just over half of our patients. So only 52% of the patients with dementia were being transferred at a time that we thought was good for them. But over the course of the project, we've worked really hard and we've now got that figure up to above 90%, consistently above 90%. You know, there are some months where we're getting 96, 97%, but consistently above the 90% mark. This chart here shows us the percentage of people experiencing significant late moves, so this is after midnight. So again, you can see the first couple of months it's about 10 to 13%, which is a figure that we were really quite shocked by. We didn't expect to find that when we looked. But again, our improvements have been great and we're now to 0%. Our last move after midnight was actually in April, earlier on in the year. And what we're finding is those moves earlier on in the year that were happening after midnight, when we investigate those, it's actually been for a clinical reason. There's been a reason for that person to be moved. And the documentation and decision-making processes around the transfers for these patients are much clearer and they're much better documented. This one here shows the percentage of people experiencing multiple moves. So ideally, a person should come into their assessment area in the hospital and then go straight to their speciality ward. They shouldn't really have any moves round about the hospital unless it's clinically indicated. And again, to begin with, a third of our patients with dementia, unfortunately, were experiencing multiple moves, avoidable multiple moves around the hospital. And now, again, we've managed to get it down consistently below 5%. So we're quite pleased about that. So facts, you know, figures, data, charts, that's only one side of things. The other side is experiences as well. So as a result of this, our staff now are telling us that they're more aware of this, they're more aware of the issue, and they're more confident in the role that they can play to have a positive impact on this, and they're more confident in advocating for their patients. Probably not more importantly, but just as importantly as our patients and our carers as well. So we attend the Carers Centre around 4 times a year to get feedback, not just on this, but on dementia care as a whole, to see where else we can improve on. And the feedback that we're getting now from our patients and carers is like night and day compared to where we were. It's far improved, which is great, and that's a real key motivator to keep our teams motivated and wanting to continually improve. So as much as, you know, it has been successful, we have seen a significant and sustained improvement, we will continue to push ourselves. We want to be the best that we can, so there will be a continued focus on this. We won't take our eye on the ball, off the ball, and we'll continue to see what else we can do with it.
Thank you very much, Nicola. That was, and I know how nervous you were, so you did fantastically well. And certainly yesterday, being in the room with the Minister for Public Health and colleagues from Alzheimer's Scotland and across all the partnerships, I think they were astounded by not only the project and the feedback and what mattered to patients, but also the hard data that we had. And I think the message was, if this board can do it, then other boards can do it. And we will certainly work closely with our colleagues to see if we can share anything. Just the last couple of slides from me, you'll be really glad to know. The board continue to focus on infection control, and if I go back to my opening comments on the things that really matter to patients and public, is the ability for people to be confident when they come into the hospitals, and often infection control is a touchstone in which people measure of whether we as a board are taking things seriously and really protecting people. And normally Graham speaks to this, but he's allowing me to speak today, so he may want to speak to you during some questions and answers. But the board continues to focus on infection control, and we continue to see really good progress around avoiding key infections. Things that you'll have heard in the press around MRSA or C. difficile, or C. diff as it can be called sometimes in the press and other reports. And we continue to show a focus on that and a continual improvement around that. We've got work to do in certain areas, and we continue to do that. And the board are really exercised both at clinical governance and at the board in terms of challenging Graham, myself and Andrew and the rest of the management team to make sure that we can make further improvements. And it is a whole system effort around that. What is really important is when external scrutiny comes into a board and really unannounced and tests us to see that our procedures and policies are in place, our staff are confident and that is happening, so there's no variance in that, and also how clean the organisation is. And you will see there that Forth Valley was the only board in Scotland up until recently where we have an HEI, Healthcare Environment Inspections, that had no requirements or recommendations. On my first quality improvement strategy, I remember putting that as an ambition and Monica telling me that we would never ever achieve it. And actually, from where we started to where we are now, it was almost unbelievable that we could. And it's been a testament to the staff, and I know Chairman and Chief Executive have spent some time with staff around that. So this is absolutely phenomenal. I think there's another board, a community hospital in Ayr recently, had no requirements or recommendations, but still breathtaking. And also we're one of the only boards, if not the only board, to never have cleaning or poor cleaning cited as part of an inspection. And these are things that we're determined to keep focused on and keep trying to achieve for the people in Forth Valley. And again, there's been a lot in the press recently around septicemia and picking up early where patients might be becoming overwhelmed by infection. And again, that's part of the patient safety programme that we have a focus on, and we'll continue to do well. And we will listen to what people have said around sepsis and support all of the efforts in that regard. So in terms of our achievements, we have a strategy around person-centred care to make sure that we are focusing on what matters to people, and we continue to do that. We have a patient story at every board, and patient stories with a whole range of patient feedback is brought together, and we are constantly making sure that that is at the heart of our improvement plans, and that is something that we do in a systematic way. And the board, through performance management and a range of other scrutiny, make sure that we are delivering on what matters to people. We have, as I mentioned at the beginning, our secret weapon is our patient and public involvement and engagement, and those who work with us closely, who give freely of their time to tell us where we can improve, and that continues to be something that the board does exceptionally well. And just lastly, for me, we've heard a lot today about volunteers. We've heard a lot about how we all come together with a range of people to make sure that care is safe and sustainable for patients. The government had an initiative to make sure that all boards in Scotland went through a process of investing in volunteering. We did that and have been successful twice. And this year the board, although it's not a government priority, it is a government priority, but it wasn't a direct ask of the board. Chairman and Chief Executive were determined that we continue to do that, and I'm delighted to see that we have been successful this year in achieving that. So just a very short summary of some of the things we're doing to keep people safe and take care of those who are in our care. Thank you.
Under the better care category, sorry, I should introduce myself, Fiona Ramsey, the Interim Chief Executive, and also my main role previously was the Finance Director at the board. Whilst we've gone through a number of achievements, we do still have under the better care banner some challenges and some issues that we have to tackle and improve on. We do have short waiting times in a number of areas. And we continue to focus on ensuring that our cancer targets are delivered. But we do have challenges, and we're focused on the 12-week outpatient wait. Particularly, we've got two specialties that have particularly long waits, so they are the focus of our attention, and these are gastroenterology, to say it quickly, and respiratory are two of the longer waits that we have. In terms of the treatment time guarantee, and that's a 12-week wait from the point of a decision to treat to the treatment, we have challenges in three areas, which is ENT, general surgery and orthopaedics. And again, we are focused on them, but we do have a balancing act. We do have some staffing challenges, as the Chairman's outlined, around our clinical staffing, and that does impact on our ability to deliver the targets. And this is going to get a bit more technical. Referral to treatment target, so that's the completed journey within 18 weeks, and we have a 90% target. We're sitting at something like 84% this month, so we're nearly there but not quite at the moment. The other bit that I wanted to flag under this area is actually using the opportunity as part of the strategy about how we modernise outpatients. So people at the moment come back for a number of appointments, called return appointments. If you've got a chronic condition, you can come back. You can be called back to just check on you. So what can we do differently? How can we do that differently? Can we use technology so somebody could be at home and be monitored? Can somebody maybe go to their primary care centre and be seen and they don't actually need to come into hospital? Or somebody be able to phone in and just check that things are okay. So we're working hard on our modernising outpatient, and that will help hopefully reduce waiting times. This morning we had our patient session just before the staff awards, and a number of the areas that we heard from were around particular challenges and particular some positive experience as well around our psychology and our child and adolescent mental health services. We have made a number of improvements. We've recruited a number of additional staff in both services, and there's been a lot of work done around service redesign. And we've also, around the CAMS, implemented a parent forum to try and pick up a number of issues. However, there is an ongoing focus, and this is one we haven't quite cracked yet, so we are on a continual improvement journey on this. But there has been a lot of work done, but we will continue in that journey. Short session from me. I'm now going to move on to the better value session and hand over to Andrew.
Can everyone hear okay? I'll just move the microphone round. Are we hearing okay down there? Not really, struggling a wee bit. I'll move that. Is that better? Is that going to be okay? Okay, thanks. Hi, good afternoon. My name's Andrew Murray. I'm the medical director here. And I'm going to talk to you about a concept and a strategy called realistic medicine. Realistic medicine is a phrase first coined at the end of 2015 and appeared in the Chief Medical Officer's report, Catherine Calderwood, that year, 15-16. The Chief Medical Officer report is usually a sort of health of the nation, but she recognised that there was a lot of other things being discussed about how to make really or deliver high quality healthcare that were much more than the public health aspects of that. And they were about how we were going about carrying out our healthcare and our interactions, our decision making. And so she coined the phrase realistic medicine. And there's a little infographic there, I'll just talk us through it. But it really captured the imagination of a huge range of people, and most importantly, it captured the imagination of doctors. For the first time, they could see a vehicle or a way that we could have some of these really important discussions and how we could potentially change our practice. So, it's just got a wee pointy bit as well. It does have a wee pointy bit. So, I'm not going to be able to point in both directions. Concentrate. No, I said okay. I used to be a surgeon, but it didn't stretch that far. I know. So the first point there is to change our style to shared decision making. So I'll come back to that in a wee second. Vitally important. You think we do that anyway? No, we don't. Build a personalised approach to care. So just across from it, and these are obviously related. Personalised approach from care would come out of a shared decision making. And then reduce harm and waste. So these are it's hard to argue with that, isn't it? We're going to reduce harm and waste. Well, that's a very positive thing to do. But really start to think how we can do it. And the box next to it really helps to give some clarity on that, because that's about unnecessary variation in practice. I'll talk a wee bit about that and how we can reduce it. And then at the bottom, manage risk better. Again, that's hard to argue with. And then at the bottom right, become improvers and innovators, which is key for us really to move health service on. So, health boards, as a doctor, I'll just go back a wee second. This really did capture the imagination of doctors. I go out and visit GP practices because I don't really know the guys in NHS Forth Valley well. So I go out and I talk to them about their issues. And a surprise for me is that occasionally, not all the time, certainly not all the time, but occasionally people will say, I want to talk about realistic medicine. And for me, that is actually quite profound, that people who have got 1,000 other priorities, they want to talk about this. There's something in realistic medicine and the clarity of the communication and the urgency of the issues that has engaged with its key demographic, doctors. And it's no disrespect to my colleagues, but doctors have heard this, and that is where our opportunity is with realistic medicine. The messages, though, do align well with all health board priorities, and NHS Forth Valley and Susan Summer-Newlands, there was already work looking at this in a more organisational way. So a lot of these themes around efficiency, productivity, quality and innovation, so we've got an EPQI team. And just to reiterate, efficiency, that's doing the same but with fewer resources. Productivity then is doing more with the same resources. But it's all about value, and value for me in healthcare, value is achieving that high quality outcome first time round. You do that, you've achieved value, and you've achieved efficiency, and you've achieved productivity. And there's evidence, these are not just statements I'm loosely making, there's a lot of evidence around healthcare models that show that's the case. So shared decision making. So why is this important? Shared decision making, well, I think, as I said, self-evident, and I can see colleagues in the audience who work in specialties who already do a lot of shared decision making, but for huge swathes of medical teams, this is a novel phrase and a novel concept. Because as we know, when someone comes into a consultation, when a patient comes in, there is an unevenness in the knowledge and the decision making. Now, a good doctor will always do their best to make that a balanced discussion with someone. But with the best will in the world, sometimes that can be difficult to achieve, and there can still be that unevenness in the hierarchy. And what we know is, actually, that tends to mean over-investigation. It means over-treatment for a lot of times. If you ask doctors, and there's studies now coming out in the last couple of years looking at this, so if you ask doctors about what treatment they want if they are unfortunate enough in the position, or if they're going through a cancer diagnosis, what treatment do they select? They don't take the treatment that they recommend to their patients. They take less radical treatment and less severe treatment because they've got that fuller picture, I suppose. And that's where we want shared decision making to end up. We don't want to be inflicting these treatments, which actually people maybe don't want. And we're offering with the best of intentions and hopefully evidence-based, but actually medical people wouldn't take them. And the messages in that, as I said, are quite profound. And that's why shared decision making is so important. So how do you make shared decision making a reality? How do you know what happens when you close the door in a consultation? So one of the things that we're doing here, and this infographic, and it was prepared by my colleagues in comms, based on, there's a big long story how we got to this, but this is the 5 questions that we want our patients to ask when they come to a consultation. We want them to come into that consultation, sit down and listen to what the clinician says. And we want them to say, is this test, treatment or procedure really needed? And what are the potential benefits and risks? What are the possible side effects? Are there simpler, safer, alternative treatment options? And what would happen if I did nothing? Again, you'd think this conversation takes place, but it doesn't. And I'm still a practicing clinician, and I can assure you sometimes it's. I know what it's like when I go for an outpatient appointment. I don't always say the things that I wanted to say, and that's me. And I know the system inside out. So patients coming into the room don't always feel empowered to do this. So this is now on the TV screens outside outpatients. So when you're about to go into your outpatient, if you're coming for a visit, hopefully as the screens scroll through, you'll see these, and hopefully you don't have to wait too long to get into your outpatient appointment. But if you've got time, you're able to look at this and consider it. And I've already had a discussion with clinicians, because I want people to welcome this when someone comes into the room. I don't want somebody to come into the room and say, I want to ask my 5 questions, that built up the courage to do that, and for us to say, what 5 questions are. Or we need to engage with this. So this is an outpatient, and not only that, this is going out in a selected, I think we're up to about 500, I can't remember, somewhere between 200 and 500 outpatient letters. So this is going out as a postcard in that letter. So somebody actually has a few weeks. If you want to talk about the waiting times, you see how long they've got to think about their questions. So they've got a bit of time to think about their questions, but just again, so this is something that we can have as a really valuable part of the consultation. And since floating this idea, just at the top there, our ED colleagues say, we want these in our screens in ED. This is mainly for outpatients. We want these in the emergency department. And then you see their orthopaedic colleagues are saying, we want these as part of our decision-making pathway before someone gets listed for a knee replacement. And I just want to acknowledge it as part of the real estate. It's approved. It's got the stamp of approval from Real Estate Medicine from our group called Choosing Wisely. So we're trying to link it all up. So that's a visible way that we can encourage shared decision-making. And then I'm not going through all 6, please hear. I want to touch on the reducing variation and why this is important. Well, it's again pretty self-evident why this is important. You would think again that there was a very set pathway for most people coming. And again, I'm going to talk about hospitals. General practice, obviously, don't quite know what somebody's going to bring up when they're there. But in hospitals, you'd think there'd be a fairly set pathway. You've got certain symptoms and you come in and that's what happens. And for some things, and for a lot of things, there's an evidence base and that's exactly what happens. But there is huge potential for variation, huge potential. So again, I'm an ENT surgeon. So if I'm sitting in my clinic on Friday afternoon and somebody comes in with a set of symptoms in this area, I could, the same discussion, I could have at least 5 different outcomes for that person. And I could justify every single one of them to the person, to one of my colleagues, because not everything is evidence-based. So I could have a discussion and ask that person to go back to their GP and say, I don't think I can do anything here, as is often the case, unfortunately. My specialty is very frustrating. Or I could request at least 2 or 3 different sorts of tests. I could potentially, depending on what we see and my interpretation of that, I could list somebody for surgery. I could do all these things, and I could discuss that person afterwards with one of my colleagues and justify every single one of those. So the scope for variation, and my specialty is particularly vulnerable in that regards, the scope for variation is absolutely huge, and this is where the issue is, because if I'm sending somebody for an X-ray, that's actually harm. X-rays are harmful. If I'm asking somebody to take medication, that's potentially harmful. They might get side effects. So until we, as a clinical community, and I'm just going to move on to that part there. Yeah, so this is about giving clinicians the data to say, or the opportunity to say, what variation is there within your practice? I want to sit down with my ENT colleagues and say, this is what we need to standardise. It needs to be that highest quality pathway every single time, because again, from around the world, we know that's the model that achieves the best outcomes and is the most efficient, most productive, and the most person-centred. So that's what we need to do. We need to go away from that personal variation, clinician-driven variation. It's all right to have variation based on the patient's needs, but clinician variation is the issue. And so the second report came out, which was Realising Realistic Medicine, as we say, the difficult second album. So this was Catherine's vision of how we might achieve it through communication, connection, collaboration, and culture. For me, that's too nebulous. But it is a cultural change, undoubtedly. But the vision of the CMO for Realising Realistic Medicine is that by 2025, everyone who provides healthcare in Scotland, so it's broadened out, it's connected, it's communicated, it's now multidisciplinary. Everyone who provides healthcare in Scotland will demonstrate their professionalism through the approaches, behaviours and attitudes of realistic medicine. I have a different vision, 2025. I want the vision to be that everyone who provides healthcare in Scotland will demonstrate that they're carrying out any treatments with minimum variation and in as person-centred a way as possible, because I think that actually is the specificity that will achieve the real aim of realistic medicine. So realistic medicine, as I said, it's been out for a couple of years. You will continue to hear about it. Our pharmacy colleagues are developing their own version of realistic medicine. One of the things I've heard in conferences recently is, should our social care colleagues have realistic social care? Should that be a philosophical discussion as well about where we take that? So it's around, this is the strategic direction. 2025 is up there. There'll be lots of things happening, and you can see some of the practical things that we're trying to do here in Forth Valley to underpin that. And now I'm going to move on to the area, one of the most challenging areas. You heard about our targets and our standards earlier on, is around unscheduled care. And under areas for action, we have, as you can see, our 4-hour emergency department emergency access standard. We've got variation there. We're also currently, as you can imagine, and you heard, I think Chairman referred to earlier about alternatives to admission. What might those look like in Forth Valley? We are committed to focusing on something called the 6 Essential Actions, which is the Scottish Government master plan, if you like, for unscheduled care. And it covers things like how you can improve your 4-hour emergency access standard, what those alternatives might look like, and where we've bulleted out there what the different actions are. We're trying to maximise new approaches to make sure that anyone who needs emergency care is identified and can use the services, but the right services, not everyone coming to the emergency department. And we have a group established to try and look at this in as systematic a way as possible, because we have these 6 essential actions, and what we're doing against all of those to try and make sure our overall system is as good as it can be for the patients and their experience. And that was a very long-winded way of setting up for our next speaker, who is Patricia Cassidy. And Patricia's our Chief Officer from Falkirk IGB. And Patricia's going to talk in a little bit more detail about one of the challenges that you've heard through the previous presentations, and that is the management of patients who are delayed in their discharge. Thanks very much.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. So, to start to think about another area for action, one of our continuing challenges is around delays in discharge from hospital. And Andrew set up very nicely the conversation about actually the right care by the right person in the right place at the right time, and actually looking at the number of people, particularly frail older people, who arrive at AD as a result of perhaps a sudden deterioration in their condition, in their frailty, maybe a fall or a collapse outside, and actually when they come into hospital to ED, they may not require an acute bed, but would require some assessment and support and care in a different setting. And that's part of the challenge that we're facing in terms of looking at all access to all of our services across the whole piece of the system, social care system, as well as primary care and acute care. Earlier this year, the Ministerial Strategic Group for Health and Social Care refreshed its focus and issued what are called 6 priority objectives for health and social care integration joint boards, and we're working towards those, and there's a significant overlap between those and the 6 essential actions, and they're around areas like delayed discharge, bed days, principally shifting the balance of care. And shifting the balance of care is about moving from all institutional care settings, not just hospital, but also care homes, and actually looking at how we can support people to live longer in their own homes and in their own communities. And given the demographic challenges that we have at both ends of the spectrum, both in terms of the increasing population over 75 and over 85 in the next 10 to 20 years, but also the decline in the potential workforce, in the decline in the numbers of young people projected to be born, but also the people who'll be delivering the care are more likely to be in that older age bracket and getting older at the same time. So we have 2 significant challenges, and we cannot sustain the way we are currently delivering our services, certainly not to meet the projected demand. So we need to do something very different. So what we've been doing here in Forth Valley area is actually looking at the whole system, and we've had help from Health Improvement Scotland and the iHub to do that. And we've worked with our service users, patients, our staff, and all of our stakeholders to actually map out people's view of the current services that we provide and all the different ways in and out of our system at the moment. And that's with a view to, first of all, understanding it, but identifying where there is duplication or perhaps 6 steps in a process when actually 2 will do, but also to identify where some of the gaps are in relation to the demand across the whole system. So as part of that as well, we've been piloting a couple of things. One is the Discharge To Assess model, and we've piloted that in Forth Valley Royal since last December. And that's about identifying patients as soon as they're deemed to be clinically fit for discharge, or in fact clinically fit not to be admitted. They will be referred to the Discharge To Assess multidisciplinary team, assessed there and then, and a care package can be put in place within 4 hours in their own home, and they receive a 6-week intensive reablement package at home, during which time they're assessed by a multidisciplinary team on a weekly basis and receive a whole reablement programme as part of that. Now that has helped our figures, but we have a continuing challenge. We managed to get to a point in the summer this year where we had no delays for packages of care across the system in NHS Forth Valley, but we had a continuing delay because of care home placements. So we haven't cracked all of the problems yet. It's a complex process and we're targeting different elements of it. One of the key things is actually looking at what services we have in terms of community-facing services and what can we do more in the community as an interim step from people from the community before they hit ED, and what are the things and the models of care we can put in place. And that's something which is under development and discussion. We already have a range of things through Closer to Home, Alfie that was mentioned in the previous presentation, and a range of other things. But actually we're reviewing those and looking at how effective they are and how we can actually line things up better. We're also exploring intermediate care models, looking at where you could have an interim step up or step down bed for someone who perhaps needs a few days course of antibiotics and some support, recuperation, and then back to their own home, or they're not ready completely to come out of hospital, but they could do with an intermediate care bed for a number of days or weeks to enable them then to get fit enough to go back home. We piloted as well, there was a test of change in the ED department last year on frailty, actually looking at assessing people and giving them what's called a comprehensive geriatric assessment, actually in ED, with a view to getting the right and appropriate care for that person. And we are in the process of working with HIS to get support. We're part of a short lead to lead one of the national pilots on that. We'll hear about that next month. We're also looking at the whole reablement approach. There's a number of different models of reablement underway in Forth Valley, and we've got a group of all of the professionals together, and we're looking at developing a consistent model and a consistent approach that should become part of the professional practice across the area through a training and development programme, so that whether you're in an acute ward, a nursing home, in your own home, you will be receiving the same reablement approach. And if you have an increased need, you will receive a tiered reablement specialist programme. And that again is about ironing out any variation in the system, but also ensuring that everything we do is a reablement approach. One of the key cultural shifts that we have to make is moving away from culture of we do things for you, we'll make you better, to how can we help you look after yourself, look after your relative, how can we help you regain some of your capacity after a medical crisis. Another key element is the development of commissioning model for home care and care at home. So all of these pilots that I've just referred to, we will take the good practice for those and actually actively commission the way that we tender for delivery of care at home and care in the community, so that we've got a directly commissioned service that is actually meeting the current and the future needs of our communities. Okay, that was just a quick overview of some of the elements of the programme we've got underway that should impact on delays in discharge. Okay, thank you.
Bounce back up again to cover just a couple of areas. and covering staff engagement and covering the financial position going forward. So the Chairman's already mentioned, I think, the staff awards this morning. I think that emphasised the enthusiasm and innovation that was happening across the organisation and the impact that staff experience has on the quality of care that's provided. Got up there the silver investors and people, which we are the recipients of, but the Chairman has been very clear with us that silver is not a colour that he recognises and that gold is the only one that's acceptable, so we are going for gold at the moment. The third one on the slide there that I'd want to emphasise is the staff learning and development. We all have to change and learn new skills and work differently, and the challenges that come ahead will require everybody to do that across. So we need to have our training programme and staff developed and fully involved in that. And money. This is a bit when it just goes, everybody goes, oh no. We do have financial challenges across the public sector. I think most people will be well aware of that. So for Forth Valley, we have got a recurrent cash saving for 17-18, and there will be more to follow in forthcoming years that we need to meet £24 million of cash savings. So our budget's £550 million, so that's just shy 5%. So for every £100 we spent last year, we have to spend £95 this year to do the simple arithmetic, and that is challenging. We've done all the simple things have all been tackled and been done. So everybody's coming up with new ideas, different ways and whatever, but it will continue to be a very significant challenge. And to flag the risks that are associated with the financial position, previous Andrew and Patricia touched on the unscheduled care, and we're going through the unscheduled care pathway. So one of the risks includes the extension to 24/7 working and changing the staffing mix around that, and that will come with challenges and likely price tag. I'd already flagged the waiting times, and again some of that is additional resource looking at how we improve our waiting times. And last but not least, prescribing, and particularly prescribing budget is across primary and secondary care, but our hospital drugs budget, consistent with other health board areas, there has been a very significant rise over recent years in that for a range of reasons. There's extensions and treatments, etc. Demand increases, new drugs coming along. So that is a real challenge, and the proportion that we're spending on drugs is increasing every year quite dramatically. So these are the challenges. They're not unique to this area. They are across all the health boards. You'll be pleased to know we're now moving on to our last section, and it's our approach to better health. And I'll pass over to Graham.
Thank you very much, Fiona. I shall try and be brief. Last year I was the first speaker and I went on for quite a long time, so I've been moved to the back of the programme. As I'm now sandwiched between questions and your refreshments, I'll be encouraged to get on a lot quicker. I have, however, learnt from my betters. We do continuous improvement in Forth Valley, so I'm following Angela's example, and I have a speaker to help me as well, so it'll be broken up. It'll not all be me. So that'll help you. And a nurse as well, yes, indeed. So, lots of things to think about around health improvement. I've summarised them on 5 slides, but as I say, I'm cheating by getting someone to come in and tell you about an exciting development in the middle. Fiona's mentioned the cash savings that we need to make and the challenges that we have. One of the big things that we can do is save the money that we spend on what the Christie Commission, a report several years ago, described as failure demand. That's basically the costs of preventable ill health. So one of the things that I need to lead as the Director of Public Health and the Director of Strategic Planning is all the work we can do to prevent ill health, because that will save us cash if we don't have to treat sickness. And it's also a better state for us all. We don't all want to be ill in our old age, I'm absolutely sure. So if we can keep ourselves well, that's really, really important. One of the big things that I wanted just to mention is that in the last month or so, we as a board have signed up to our new health improvement strategy. I'm not going to tell you a great deal about it today. We're about to go into a process of engagement and consultation around it with our community planning partners. But in essence, it's really important for me because it's a public statement by this health board of our commitment to tackle deprivation and inequalities, and to do that in a way that targets 4 or 5 simple things that we can do. And the problem is if we try to do everything in challenging times, we don't make the progress we need to make. And one of the things that we've learnt through all the programmes, like the patient safety programme, like realistic medicine, like some of the things you've been hearing about today, is that we need to be person-centred, and we need to put all the supports around people all at the same time, and we need to be effective. So our plan, or the plan set out in the inequality strategy, is to try and target a small number of high priority topics and do really, really well on those priority topics. And I firmly believe if we do that, we will start to make real progress on deprivation and inequalities in a way that we haven't been able to do before. So that's a big important thing that we're going to move forward on. Now, the 4 pillars that I've set out in that strategy are early years, because it's absolutely imperative that people get the best possible start in life. There's a section on worthwhile work, because actually having a worthwhile contribution to society, whether it's a paid job or whether it's volunteering, is one of the most significant things that keeps people well. It gives you that reason to get up in the morning, it gets you out, it keeps you active, it makes you a contributing member of society, so that's really good for your mental health. So worthwhile work is something we're going to be focusing on. I've added in a section which is new to me. In my previous Director of Public Health annual report, I'd set out priorities, but I've added in mental health as a specific topic. I've done that because our community planning partners have highlighted it to me as a really important priority, because we're dealing with an awful lot of mental health issues in our local communities, and we need to target that. So mental health is now in there. And substance misuse is my 4th major category. And we need to continually remember the harm that's happening to our local populations due to alcohol and particularly due to drugs in Scottish society. And we need to tackle those issues. And I think we are at a very important turning point after about 20 years of keeping people in maintenance programs for substance misuse. We're really starting to evidence that people can move into recovery. You can move from being a substance misuser into someone who is in recovery, who's not actively taking drugs anymore, provided that your support is person-centred, provided that all those supports are put in place around you at the right time. So there's really positive moves there, and if we can land that very well, we will do a huge amount to reduce the costs of ill health and reduce particularly the social care costs that go that our partners are having to pick up through alcohol and substance misuse problems. So that's really, really important to us. Now, where's the device to move forward? So I just mentioned briefly there early years. I've got 1 or 2 things I want to say about the best possible start in early years before I hand over to my speaker, who's going to give you an example of a really practical project we're doing. So I've mentioned on the slide there the work that we're doing around the Children and Young People's Improvement Collaborative. That's very similar to the Scottish Patient Safety Programme, but it's around children and young people. It's looking at the evidence of the things we need to do to keep people well and systematically applying it to every child every time. And that makes a real difference. So that's very important for us, and we are making progress, and there are lots of good examples. No Forth Valley presentation can go forward without the mention of the Daily Mile just now. So the Daily Mile started in Forth Valley. It was an early years collaborative initiative in Forth Valley, and it is now not just Scotland-wide, not just UK-wide, but worldwide, that we have got children in primary schools getting off their seats and going out and walking a mile every day, and it's making a huge difference. And it's a thing I'm very proud of, that as of this week, the Scottish Government is now signing up businesses. So Scottish Power is the first large business that signed up to also do an adult Daily Mile. So actually, if we can get everyone to walk a mile every day, that will make a huge difference to Scotland's health. It's really simple, it's easy to do, and it's safe, and it costs very, very little. And so the Daily Mile that started in our primary schools in Forth Valley is now rolling out and making a huge difference. I also just wanted to mention the antenatal access target, which is one of the first things that we had in the early years collaborative work, and we have consistently nailed the target of getting pregnant ladies in Forth Valley registered with a midwife early in their pregnancy so that we can step in and keep them healthy, because antenatal care is incredibly important. We need not just to make sure people get their prenatal vitamins, we need to make sure they're not drinking alcohol. You've probably all heard the no alcohol, no risk message around fetal alcohol syndrome. We need to make sure we're in there early with smoking cessation for people who have a nicotine addiction, and we need to make sure that we're immunising pregnant ladies to protect both them and their children, because they pass on immunity. So things like influenza, tetanus, and whooping cough are big issues, so they're really, really important. The other things we need to do, we need to recognise that we need to protect people. For anyone who's not heard about adverse childhood experiences, if you've not heard about them before, you will be hearing a lot about them in the next year or two, because we're absolutely beginning to realise the importance of adverse childhood experiences. There are about 10 key things which, if you experience them as a child, you will go on to experience much worse health outcomes as an adult. And it is simple things that are really societal issues, things like physical abuse, mental abuse, sexual abuse, parental separation, imprisonment of a parent during your childhood, alcoholism in the family, mental health issues in the family, neglect, or gender-based violence in the home. So if we can get to a position where children in Scotland are not growing up experiencing those things in their early years, then we will have much healthier adults in Scotland. So again, big priority for that, and it's really good that that's now starting to come through, and we're starting to deliver on that. And this does make sense in terms of a lead into my speaker. So children who are born into disadvantage do less well. They have less healthy outcomes. That's children from poorer parents. It's to our shame in Scotland that something like 40% of all of our children are living in households who are in relative poverty, and we need to sort that. So children who are born into disadvantage, children who are born to poorer parents, children who are born to single parents, and children who are born to young parents particularly have all these challenges around adverse experiences and so on. So what I wanted to do at this point was invite my colleague, Lorraine Newbiggin, to come up and tell you a bit about the Family Nurse Partnership in Forth Valley, which is a real live project that we're doing to tackle those specific issues and make life much better for some of those young parents and particularly for their children. So, Lorraine, would you like to come and do that? I'll just sit here.
Thank you. Hi, thank you very much for the opportunity to tell you about our Family Nurse Partnership in Forth Valley that we're really proud of, and we're starting to see real changes for our young people. So the Family Nurse Partnership is actually, for anybody who's maybe never heard me before, you might get a bit bored hearing the same thing, sorry. It's a project that's from America, and it has 40 years worth of randomised controlled trials, proving the outcomes that we have actually been finding with the project. So the main outcomes really, obviously we have a long list of them that you see there, but in the main it's actually changing the life expectancies really for these young people and actually giving them a real chance in life. So the things that Graham's talking about, the adversities that our young people find themselves being born into, we're actually trying to change that around by real interagency partnership working, making a huge difference to the young people's lives. So we find the randomised controlled trials have told us that there's an increase in well-being really for the mother and the baby during the antenatal phase, which we know is really important. We're looking at a reduction in child injuries and less likely to have child abuse and neglect. We work really hard at actually that very early bonding and attachment and mums really owning their children and keeping them safe. We talk about a greater interval between pregnancies. We're looking at young people making real decisions. Their nurses don't make decisions for them. It's actually empowering them to make really good choices by thinking about what they're doing rather than what most people do as teenagers and just react very quickly, which again has a lot to do with early brain development at that time. And we're looking obviously at improving the chances of these young babies that are being born, that we're improving their cognitive development and really early interaction to make huge changes. For eligibility for Family Nurse Partnership, our young people need to be 19 or under at their last menstrual period. It needs to be their first baby because we know through the randomised controlled trials that the first time that's happening in a pregnancy is the absolute optimum time for change. So although we would get changes, I think, at any stage, the best outcomes are definitely in the first pregnancies. We're also Another part is that they're not planning to relinquish the baby and they are planning to bring the baby up on their own. that they'll reside in Forth Valley, or I think that's probably changing because now that the Scottish Government have actually now got in policy that every young person eligibly would be entitled to a family nurse if they live in Scotland. So we're finding throughout Scotland that we're now doing transfers in and out to other areas who also have FNP. And it's also a voluntary programme. So probably when we talk about in this culture now, when we're actually under huge financial strain, what we actually found with this project is that for every dollar that's invested, there was a $5 return. And that was really because when you look at the outcomes, the savings are actually coming the opposite way then. So we have less stays in hospital, we've got less children in foster care, they hopefully are better looked after and less child protection concerns, less the need for social services, that we're empowering our young people to be confident and being able to for instance, look at benefits, look at housing, look at education and hopefully returning to work and being more sustainable. And much less interactions obviously with like police or any crime, that they're actually making real positive life changes and stopping the cycle of deprivation. Obviously this is a huge ask and we think how do we possibly do that? And obviously the Family Nurse Partnership, I'm really proud to say, in Forth Valley has had huge buy-in throughout Forth Valley. Particularly, every agency really, we work very closely with our midwifery colleagues who helped at the very beginning to get this project off the ground, and it goes all the way through the organisation. We have very close links with our health visitor colleagues, school nurses and GPs, everybody that really needs to be involved. And I think it's a bit like what Graham's saying, unless you have a real coordinated approach and the right help in at the right time, that's the only chance that we're actually going to make a difference. But we also look to our local authority partners as well, and we've got, that's the example I'm going to tell you about actually just a bit later. The client journey for us, we find, it can be really heart-wrenching. There is clients that come from all walks of life, but often we find they're from really deprived areas. They're our most difficult to reach clients. They might have come from being looked after in foster care, lots of different placements. They might be sofa surfing and nobody really owning them. Sometimes we find that there's not much family buy-in, but not always. We find from all areas. But what we are finding increasingly more now, as Scotland's teenage pregnancy rate drops, we're finding that it's actually from the most deprived areas that we're finding our clients, so quintiles 1 and 2. So the expected poor outcomes. It would be young people really experiencing huge hardship at times, exceptional pressures like housing, finances, relationships, often low self-esteem, and the adverse childhood experiences that Graham was talking about earlier, we often find that there's an abundance of them too. So the story I was going to tell you about was about a young client in Clackmannanshire area, and interestingly, Clackmannanshire has the highest rate of pregnant teenagers in Scotland. So although it is coming down, it's significant for Clackmannanshire. And the other thing about partnership working is we also have a young parents project there, which in this case, we linked up very closely with. And again, just going back to that we had to link up to have the best possible outcomes here. So we'll call her Nicola. This isn't actually the family, it's just obviously for her confidentiality. We're just showing you a picture at the moment. This young family, Nicola was 15 and in 4th year at school when she found out she was pregnant. She came from a background she did have a supportive family, and her mother cared for her father who was disabled, and the family were entirely dependent on benefits for their household income. Her partner was a young lad of 14, so he was a year younger, still in school. Both of them were at school, and he was a looked after child in Clackmannanshire in foster care. So when you think about that straight off, that was obviously really challenging. From quintiles 1 and 2, what we expect, and then you're thinking about outcomes for this girl and what her life's going to be. So what happened is our midwifery colleagues told us about her very early, which was, again, hugely beneficial, that the early intervention could start at the best possible time. We linked up with the project that I was talking about in Clackmannanshire, and we actually jointly worked with this girl. She had no idea what she was wanting to do at that time. She was really scared, she was really frightened. She had every intention on leaving school until she actually discovered she was pregnant, and then she started to rethink what she actually wanted. And I think going back to the Professor Ald's outcomes, that this is the opportune time for change. she started to think about what does she want her life to be, what does she want her child's life to be, and she started making really positive choices in her life. She decided to stay at school, which was a fantastic thing. She stayed on then to 6th year, and she left school with really good education qualifications. And she then went on to college and started to pursue a career in childcare. She did have a healthy baby girl because, again, we improved her antenatal outcomes probably too with early intervention. And the baby is absolutely thriving, meeting all developmental requirements. So again, what you would expect from that quintiles 1 and 2, we were finding quite the opposite. She's actually a really high achieving wee girl, way past what we would expect, and now well settled in nursery. They are still in a relationship, this couple, and the dad has also graduated now from school. He also completed 6th year and is now pursuing a career in engineering. So I think from what you actually think you're going to have to what we actually did have is entirely different. And this pregnancy, I think a lot of young people think their life is over when they're pregnant, but it's not. It can probably sometimes, and I think in this case, it changed her entire projection. And so it's a really nice, uplifting story, but there's many of them. If we have the right coordinated care at the right time, and we work alongside our clients and ask them what they want to do, our philosophy always is that the client's the expert in her own life, and that she'll tell us if we listen, we will actually be able to work with her, because she will start to actually make her road, and we can support her to do that jointly with a full wraparound care. So, thank you.
Thank you very much, Lorraine. It makes such a difference to have real practitioners coming up and speaking and bringing this story to life rather than just me. I'm sure you'll agree. So thank you for doing that. You'll be pleased to know there are really just 4 slides left. You're doing really well. We've spoken to you for a long time this afternoon, so thank you for hanging in there, and I'm just going to go through the last few. As I said, there were 5 main priorities in the Health and Inequality Strategy. That was the first one about early years. I'm now just going to walk you briefly through work, mental health, substance misuse, and then population programs, and I've just got those 4 slides and one example on each, so hopefully we're on the home straight. Okay. So first of all, find the device. There we go. So the first one is about work. Work, as I said earlier, is incredibly important. If we can get young people healthy, if we can keep them healthy as young people, if we can give them the best possible start, if we can get them engaged in school, and if we can actually have them with positive aspirations and hope that they've got a worthwhile contribution and a career pathway to go on to, then we're halfway there in terms of breaking the difficult cycles of deprivation. So work is really, really important. And we're doing lots of work with schools to try and get people engaged and give them positive futures, lots of training work. And just the example there is we're working quite hard with modern apprenticeships to try and make sure that we're giving people work opportunities. So we're now in our 2nd year of modern apprenticeships as an organisation, NHS Forth Valley. All of our partner organisations also are engaged in the modern apprenticeship programme, and we're about to start recruiting for our 3rd year. So that's really, really important if we're going to help young people to have a positive, engaging role. I want to just say a little bit about alcohol and drugs. So that's the next slide. We do have a strong focus on alcohol and drugs locally. It's important that we do that. The costs of substance misuse and alcohol are absolutely enormous. We do most of our work through the alcohol and drug partnerships in Forth Valley. I'm the chair of the Forth Valley Alcohol and Drug Partnerships Group, and then we have a separate ADP in each of the local councils. They're very effective. They work largely through voluntary sector organisations and our own substance misuse teams within the NHS, and they wrap around services around individuals who've got problems. And in particular, we're moving into an era of recovery, and I just can't stress that enough. That recovery-oriented care is really, really important. It's becoming more and more effective. In Forth Valley, we have now 4 recovery cafes where individuals in recovery meet together to provide each other with peer support. We're about to open our 5th. I'm pleased that we've hosted our 2nd Recovery Olympics, where teams from all over Scotland of individuals in recovery have come together and competed, a bit like the Invictus Games. Really, really positive. We were very proud last year to host the Scottish Recovery Walk, where we had thousands of individuals in recovery gathering at the Kelpies and then walking through Falkirk to the park to celebrate recovery and finishing up in a recovery village with all the voluntary sector groups that are there to support. So real progress and turning things around so we can move forward. I do want to say just a little bit about mental health. So again, it's really, really important to us. We're doing lots of good work locally. I want to mention stress control. So we're doing lots of work to try and help individuals to manage stress, to recognise stress and to take appropriate action. We're working with local secondary schools, sorry about the buzzing, on things like mindfulness and resilience, so that children and young people are less prone to mental health problems as they grow up. There are a lot of things going on in society. It's pretty tough out there, actually, and helping people to be mentally aware, to have mindfulness, to be able to be resilient is really, really important. And something we're particularly proud of in Forth Valley is that we're the only Scottish Health Board that offers mental first aid training free of charge to anyone who wants it. So we've delivered mental health first aid training in most of our local secondary schools. I'm pleased to say that we're engaged with Police Scotland as a partner, so all of the community police officers who work in local secondary schools have now had mental health first aid training. And also Forth Valley College is engaged with our programme, so all of the lecturers in Forth Valley College now have mental health first aid training, and also a peer programme with students at the college engaging in mental health first aid training. So it's about the community coming together and supporting itself. So that's a really important development, and it's something we're going to keep going with over the next couple of years. So that we've got really widespread support so that people can recognise mental health issues early, act and support people. And then this is my final slide. This was just to say that our fifth priority is to maintain the national improvement programmes that we're currently undertaking. So there's a wide range of improvement programmes that we're committed to. Health in Scotland is actually improving. It's improving steadily. It has been improving steadily for the last 20 years. That's a good news story. Deprivation and inequalities are getting wider, but the background rate of health is actually improving, and it's because we've got all these national programmes. So I've just mentioned some of the immunisation programmes there as examples. So we immunise vast numbers of people against childhood diseases. We do immunisation against seasonal flu. We do specialist programmes when we need to. That's really, really important. I could also have listed all the national screening programmes, cervical screening, breast screening, abdominal aortic aneurysm screening we now do, bowel screening and so on, which are helping us to bring cancer rates down. And we've made huge strides in all sorts of different areas where we have these national programmes, be it diet, obesity, dental health and so on. So there's lots and lots of good work out there that I'm not going to tell you about in detail but please just remember all that good work is going on. And that actually concludes our Death by PowerPoint. Well done for staying with us to the end. Thank you very much.
Teresa McNally. I was very interested to hear Graham's thing about intervention and the substance misuse in young people as well as across the population. I wonder, with all this integration, is it actually working quite closely with the criminal justice services? Because I think they're at the front line too.
That works, doesn't it? Yes. Thank you for raising that. It's incredibly important. One of the things we've had in Scotland in the last 12 months is the passage of legislation through partnership that's causing a complete reform of the community justice system. So as we move forward trying to implement that, we're going to make a huge difference in the way arrangements are made. Part of that is things like the government presumption against short sentencing, so we don't just put people into prison because we've got nothing else we can think of to do with them. And instead we have recovery programmes and we have community programmes, because actually the evidence says you can improve people's outcomes hugely if you use community sentences instead of admitting them to prisons. The other sort of things we're doing is because we now as the health service run the healthcare services in prisons, we have a much greater ability to influence outcomes. So we're learning all sorts of issues which are holding back prisoners or which are causing prisoners to have difficulties on discharge. So, for example, one of the things I was talking about only earlier this week is that in order to register for benefits, you have to do that on an IT system now. If you're in prison, you're absolutely forbidden from being on the internet, so you can't actually register for your benefits until after you've left prison. If we could actually just make a small change to the system so you can register for benefits before you're released, that would make a huge difference to prisoners. Similarly, we need to be able to register people back with their GP or make sure that they stay registered with the GP whilst they're in prison. And these sort of things are making a difference. So on the back of the Reform of Community Justice, there are now reducing reoffending boards in each of our 3 local authorities. So they are partnership boards, they're part of the community planning structures, and we're really starting to engage with issues like that about how we can do better around both keeping people out of prison, rehabilitating them, and then making sure they don't reoffend after their sentence.
Thanks, Jim. Another question? Yes? Could you say who you are in?
Hi, my name's Fiona Ramsey and I'm from Clackmannanshire. I'm basically wanting to ask a question about the lack of medical retina specialists in ophthalmology. There's currently only one in Forth Valley, and I believe this is going to lead to long-term problems with the ageing population, etc., with diabetes, etc. My own situation is that I have diabetic retinopathy and require injections every 6 to 8 weeks, and there is an issue with getting that care, access to it.
Andrew, would you like to take that?
Sorry, where I didn't see you. Hi. So the treatments for macular degeneration have really been revolutionised in the last few years, and the opportunities around those effective treatments are now there, and they were never really available, as I said, up until recently. So the models, initially when those models came in, it was consultant-led. It was the doctors who were administering those injections. Having been in the health board here for the last 6 or 7 months, this is not an issue that I've heard of as being a compromise in terms of the access times for people. If it is, you're right, it's something that I would want to look at, because I know there's extended roles, there's other people that can provide that service as well. People can be trained up to do it, and I think we should be looking at it. The key thing is it's got to happen at the right time to prevent the disease progressing. So it's one of our most time-sensitive clinical situations. And for me, so I think there are ways that we can, if you're noticing issues, that we can resolve it. I've not heard of those yet, and it's not because I've not been listening out for them. It's just that I'm not hearing from the teams that they feel they have a capacity issue, but your experience is obviously different. So I'm going to take that away as something that I can then follow up on. I don't know if any of my colleagues have any other comment. I think Angela might have a comment.
No, just to say that Fiona, we are aware, and we're currently in close conversation with Fiona, so I'll just make sure that Andrew comes into that conversation. So, and I know the colleagues have spoken to me this week, so we will absolutely do that. I think Andrew's point, and I know Amanda will have captured that, is that timing issue. So it's very important. Andrew and I will pick that up and we'll speak to you next week.
But I absolutely understand the importance. It's not something that we can compromise on.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions?
Janice Classen from Stirling. I've came for years to these meetings, as everybody knows, didn't manage last year, and the format this year I feel is disappointing, because it used to be with each speaker you could ask the questions after each speaker. I may be wrong, but am I correct? Yes, I am. I've got 8 questions, so I'm not going to half like. Everyone knows I've never got one question, but one question that I've got 2 questions. One relating to myself, that'll come second, but the one question that upset me when I heard it on the news last weekend was regarding ambulance service in, I think it was West Caithness, where it was ambulances where they had one ambulance driver, not a fully qualified paramedic, but a trainee, so they couldn't give medic, they couldn't give drugs, they couldn't give all they could do was pick the person up. It was like a taxi driver. It was on TV, and a friend also told me it was in the paper. She gave me the cutout, but I've not got it with me, but it was in West Caithness. And my question is, has it ever happened here in the past? Is it happening here, or is it likely to happen in the future? Because apparently it's a case of lack of qualified paramedics or qualified ambulance attendants within the area. So I'm hoping that it never happens here. It won't, Andrew. Is that your call? Can I put you on tape on that? I will.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, but I'll give you a question.
So thanks for raising that, and I'm happy to pick up any questions you don't get asked. I did. There's been lots, and we haven't had that issue here, and I think I'm surrounded by colleagues, and I'm sure that everyone's, it is worrying. I think, I know the Chairman has said previously in board meetings, but the ambulance service themselves are changing quite significantly, so that they've got more technicians, more paramedics, and their roles are being extended. So the whole, and they're also looking at how they're triaging their calls to make sure the most urgent patients get the ambulances and vice versa. So I think at the moment the ambulance service are really shifting. We've certainly not had that programme, that issue locally, and even in our rural areas I'm not aware of that, but if any colleagues do have concerns they can let us know afterwards. Is that okay?
Can I put my type, not my 8, but I'll give the same one, especially when I heard this lady at the back about her optical problem. I had a problem, and I spoke to Stuart Cumming about it. He dealt with it, and I've spoken to Andrew, and I'll get back. But I have a condition, a type of Parkinsonism. I'm the only person apparently in the whole of Forth Valley. I don't have a neurologist who knows anything about this. The only man that I know is a man in Southern General, who I've seen twice, and because he's out with my area. So my question is, why, if a person doesn't have a consultant or a neurologist who knows about a condition, why can't I be referred to someone out with Forth Valley to Glasgow? And apparently Stuart Cumming, who I did have a meeting with before, he checked all the neurologists, and he doesn't know about. I'm the only one person with this particular one of 28 types of Parkinson's.
So, yeah, I'm sorry to hear that. Usually that's exactly the way it would work. If we don't have the local expertise and we know where the expert is, then we would want to access that for the person. Because especially if you have a rare condition, there's not going to be people locally who will have got the experience to be able to advise you. So I would have expected that if you saw one of our neurologists within the team here and they were discussing your condition with you and they said, actually, this is really rare, we need to get you to someone else. We have mechanisms set up to monitor and facilitate that, but to try and make sure that it happens. So if, for whatever reason, if the neurology team here have not been able to do that, they usually quite quickly come to us because they're great advocates for their patients to say, my patient needs this. That's what the doctors tend to tell us.
I put myself privately down through all different lines until I got to Donald in Glasgow.
So,
and all the neurologists, it used to be about that case there.
I don't think any of them are here.
All
But what we can do is absolutely, if it's okay with you, we can take that information back to the neurology team and just see what their understanding is and what's it.
Twice in Glasgow,
yeah.
But it's a case of because I'm out with the area, I can't get to. And I've heard people that have a particular condition can go to London, go to other areas. So why you can't get?
No, you're absolutely right. It all depends on the clinical need of the person and whether we. So the first question is, do we have somebody that can deal with the problem here? And if we don't, who do we know that can? And then sometimes we hear of national specialists, and you're right, there is a mechanism, and Graham supervises the process for accessing those kind of other sorts of services that we don't have here. So something's not quite worked for you, obviously, and I'm sorry about that, but let's see what the context is. You've been out the loop, aye.
Richard?
I'm Richard Simpson. I used to be an MSP for the area, and I was Shadow Public Health Minister and previously a doctor. I don't have 8 questions, you'll be glad to hear, but I do have 1 or 2. Last year I raised the issue of the CAMS, and I listened carefully to the report, and I attended the Patient Voices Patient Forum that's been set up, which I hope works well. And I congratulate the board on the fact that the target has been met. It's not all the boards have met that target, but the waiting time target has been met. But the median waiting time is 14 weeks compared to a Scottish average of 11 weeks. And there were still 332 rejected referrals last year. In the last 12 months, that's up till June in the report. So, there are still some concerns there. And my last point is I did a Freedom of Information inquiry to every mainland health board at the tail end of the year there. And no board at all had done any analysis of the outcomes of those patients who'd been rejected, nor had they done anything to follow up the 13% did not attends. So we're talking about, between the 2 figures, getting on for 1 in 3 of all patients referred to the services either not attending and no known outcome, or being rejected and no known outcome. Now the mental health strategy, I'm glad to say, is now indicated in action point 18 that the government are committed to audit this situation. And Forth Valley was the only board of the 10 mainland boards to say that they were looking into it. So my question on that one is, what progress is being made on auditing what's happened to the rejected referrals? I should explain for those who don't know, rejected is a very bad title. It's actually signposted to other services. But nevertheless, 2/3 of all those referred in the FOI that I did were conferred by either consultants or GPs. So either they don't understand the protocol or they don't understand the thresholds that are being used, but that's a very significant number of doctors whose referrals they think are appropriate are being rejected. That's my first question.
Hello, I think I've written to you actually to see if you want to come into the service, so you will be getting a letter if you've not had it already. So I think on the back of certainly the FOI we started to look at our rejections, and again it is, we like to call them as redirections. Because we're not rejecting any child out of hand, certainly. And the last piece of audit work we did, which was in the last quarter there, one of the differences we noticed between some of the other quarters was our numbers of redirections has reduced, and the Scottish average I think was about 23%, ours was 13%, so I'm really pleased that we've managed to do that already. And the guys and the team are sitting over there, they do a lot of work round about the quality now that we've been meeting the standard for a while. And some of the things that we were noticing was sometimes we have children who are referred and they are referred maybe two or 3 weeks before their 18th birthday. Now our service goes up to 18, it's one of the few that goes up to 18. And what we did was we did a piece of work with our colleagues in adult mental health. And if we have a child who comes in at that juncture, we will speak to our colleagues in adult mental health and they will be redirected there without any loss to their time frame. There are some that would be termed as rejections that are actually just us looking for more information to see whether actually the information was the right information. And I have to say the team manager, Jackie, as well, has done a lot of work, and our GP colleagues have worked really hard with us to make sure that actually is a very low number, so that's actually been reducing, which is great. The other redirections are 2/3 sector and self-help. We've done a lot of work around about self-help and looking at our website, and our education colleagues were working hard with them. And I guess the next piece of work for us is to look at the children to see if the children come back into the service or whether what we've done has been adequate. There's still a piece of work I think to do with the sort of GPs, which we will kick off once we've finished we've got more progress with our patient engagement. But as you say, that's actually one of the things that's going to help us in the future, because what we found was actually when we got some parents to the meeting, some of them had been referred and actually weren't quite sure why they were there. So it's quite a lot of work and understanding about the function of CAMHS. And I think picking up on things Graham's talking about, going into the schools and the colleges, is really important for us. So it's about, you know, some of the things that are more self-help than actually having children who have mental health labels. So I think it's really important that we do that piece of work. I was also struck when Andrew was talking about realistic medicine, about actually a lot of the stuff we've been doing would fit under the term realistic mental health. So there's maybe something about how we badge that better in the future. Hope we answered all your questions. So I'll exactly talk about it for an hour.
I think that's really positive, and I really congratulate the board on taking this very seriously. They were the only board to respond in that way, I have to say. And perhaps the information you got could be passed to the government, because they haven't yet started to even tender for the audit that they've said is their action point. My second question is really, and a general point, is there's a huge challenge in general practice, and I don't think that really was addressed today. I mean, I'm not saying there are solutions to it. I know there's a lot of work being done with clusters, with multidisciplinary working, etc. But I'm slightly surprised in all the other positive things and all the other challenges that were mentioned today, and I'm glad to see they were, that wasn't mentioned. So can I ask how many of the practices are currently 2C and how many have come out of a 2C arrangement? That's a direct being run by the health board. How many of those 2C practices are not taking new patient registrations? And how many of the currently independent practices, that under Section 17 independent GP practices, have restricted new registrations other than by the agreed geographical boundaries? I'm asking that because in Edinburgh there are now 45, there were 40 practices when I raised the issue in 2013. It's now 40% of all the practices in Lothian are rejecting new registrations or are restricting them to a very small number every week. So it's really becoming quite difficult for patients to register, and I wonder how much of a challenge that is locally. And I've got one other question, but it's very short.
Well, this is working. I can pick up in terms of Section 2C, we've got 3 practices currently under Section 2C, Slamane, Bannockburn and Kerseybank. They've been there for, I think I was speaking to the practice managers from Kerseybank and Bannockburn, so that's 2 years, just coming up for 2 years that we'll have been working with them at the start of next year. I know Andrew and I have recently visited Bannockburn, and we're really impressed with the teamwork and the practice working there. And there were a number of patients in the surgery that were all very positive. So we learn from experience, and that experience we can take into and are taken into the wider primary care arena. It was on some of the slides around the primary care transformation. I think just in the length of the stuff we were trying to get through, I think we probably just skipped over it. It's not an underestimation around the work there. And there is a lot of work going on around how we can support the practices across the area in terms of the different skills that you need. And indeed we saw the staff awards, the extended scope practitioners actually won one of the staff awards, which was really good in terms of the work in primary care. Around the practices with their lists, I couldn't tell you exact numbers off the top of the head. James might be able to help with that.
None are formally closed. The 3 practices now are all open but full, and they're the only ones currently that aren't accepting new referrals without allocation.
Okay, so you still have a major priority within our board, Richard. Although we didn't show it this year because we covered it extensively last year, we wanted to show other things we're doing. You've only got about an hour, it's difficult to squeeze everything in. That is a major priority, it's a major concern with the declining number of AGP, so we'll be close to that agenda as a board.
My last question is a quick one. In 2015, the new Mental Health Act required boards to publicise getting advance statements. And I was checking the website and saw that your welcome pack for the admissions did have something on advance statements, but it was buried inside medical legal proceedings. It wasn't a separately indexed title. Since advanced statements both for physical health and mental health are an important part of realistic medicine and partnership, can I ask what the board is actually doing to fulfil the requirement of the Act in publicising the patients working with their GPs particularly to draw up advanced statements of what their wishes might be if they lack capacity?
I think Eurona's right. Why don't I pass over to you? I'm going to
Hello, it's working now. I'm Rona Morrison, Associate Medical Director for Mental Health. We've started a group fairly recently actually with our medical records colleagues, just from the mental health perspective in terms of advanced statements. Although it's been around for many years, as you rightly say, we're trying to increase the focus again. I don't think we're doing it as well as we might. And so it's not just about encouraging people to complete advanced statements, but it's where we actually locate them so that they're actually accessible and people are taking account of them at the right time. So it's not a complete piece of work, but it's ongoing, and there's an actual group set up to take that forward. So perhaps when we meet next time I can give you more of an update. But that's just from a mental health perspective, not the general practice bit.
Satisfied with that? Any other questions? No? Well, conscious it's Friday night. So if there's no any questions, we'll maybe just conclude that. Say thanks very much for coming along. Hope you found the session helpful. And as I say, everything we do is in person centred. So if there's any issues about our services, don't hesitate to either approach our customer service or one of our directors. We are open, as I was told, this one shooting 65 days a year, so we'll hear back that long. But we are genuinely want to improve health and make sure that people get the health care that they actually need as professionally as possible. So we want to still start as a journey. We want to continually improve it, needs change, staff change. So please give us feedback, good, bad and indifferent throughout the year. So thanks very much for your attendance. Thank you.